Let's look at booting the Supercollider server and recompiling. So in order to make any sound, we have to actually boot the Supercollider server. Now I mentioned in the text that Supercollider is sort of like two programs. One is a server and one we call the client, or sometimes we call it SC-Lang, the client or Supercollider language side. The server side really is sort of a more hard-coded, less accessible kind of entity out there that really is optimized for making sound. So there's this idea that you can have a number of sound-making functions. Oftentimes they're called UGens, hard-coded, little chunks of code that are already sort of floating about out there. And you can give that server, the sound making machine, instructions from a remote destination. In this case, the Lang and the server, or in most cases, oftentimes will be on the same machine. So I have the server, I have a server and I have a language, and the language is sending instructions to the server. I guess if I want to get into a little bit of history, when Max Matthews was developing his Music N or Music 1 through 5 series, he came up with a sort of like sound production score paradigm. In other words, you have sort of your orchestra, your sound producers, and he tucked that away in things. In little chunks of code, and that's a lot like the Supercollider server. You have a bunch of instruments or sound producers available to you, and then you have your score side, which is kind of like a musical score, but in this case we're using code, and so we're giving it instructions. We can tell it to produce a certain pitch or a certain rhythm or a certain combination of sounds or a certain conglomeration of sounds from our SC-Lang side or our client side. All right, well, all that's to say for this tutorial is simply that in order for us to make sound, you have to boot the server or get that server started up. It's kind of running in the background. What we're looking at in the IDE, this part here, is really the language side. This is the side we give instructions. But in order for us to use the server, we have to boot it. A number of ways to do that really is to use, if you go to language, you can boot your server. I guess I'm already booted. So let me quit my server. So you can quit your server there. You can boot the server, and then you'll notice all this stuff comes up. I found, at least in this current time and this iteration of Supercollider, we need to be waiting for these three messages. I know some of our machines at school are a bit slow, so you'll get this, and then 30 seconds later, so you get this one, and then later you'll get that one. But you need all three for the server to be really going. Okay, and if you run into some trouble, you can reboot your server, and that'll just reboot it. All right, and also you can do s.boot. You can boot it from code. If you do s.boot, let me quit it first. s.boot, that'll boot your server as well. And you can do s.reboot, I think. Yeah, you can do s.reboot, that sort of thing. All right, and there's a number of different commands, but we'll get into that later. If you run into some trouble or something, a loop gets stuck, or Supercollider, inevitably this will happen to you, you can just restart the whole thing. This is sort of better than quit and restart, though sometimes you might have to resort to that as well. You can recompile, we call recompile the class library. So that'll sort of run through, it'll take everything offline and run through everything and redo everything. Okay, and then of course, if you've done that, you have to boot the server. Stop. Okay, there's that. Okay, well, that should do it. So there you go. We have boot, booting the server, and also recompiling. Oh, there's a keyboard command for recompile. Might as well show that, and that is Shift, and at least in the Mac, Shift Command L. So if I do Shift Command L, that reboots everything.